Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you my review of the Viltrox Autofocus 13mm F1.4 STM lens, and this is for Sony E-mount. Now, I did actually already review this exact lens on Fuji X-mount going back a few months, which was what they had available at that time. They're now bringing out some of the other mounts to market, including the E-mount, and the reason why I was interested in taking a second look at this lens, there's a few things. First of all, I was really impressed with the performance on Fuji when it came to autofocus and of course the optical performance as well. However, on Sony, there is a little bit more varied competition in the market, and so I was interested in seeing how it stood up coming to that platform, and also interested in doing something that I can't do on a Fuji platform. Fuji only doing APS-C, but on Sony, E-mount can work on both APS-C bodies and then also on full frame bodies. I was interested in seeing, as you know, I get asked almost always when doing lenses like this, how much of the full frame sensor a lens like this that's designed for APS-C will cover. In some cases, of course, it covers most of the full frame sensor. That's not the case here, unfortunately. And as you can see, there is a lot of mechanical vignette if you shoot in full frame, and even if I crop a lot of that out, I still only end up very slightly wider than what the APS-C crop is. You could get a little bit wider if you did a different kind of crop, particularly if you did more of a, one-to-one type crop. You could certainly get more in the image frame. But for the most part, this is an APS-C lens that covers the APS-C image circle, and you're not going to get a whole lot more out of it than that. Some of the other things that I was interested in checking out were taking a look at autofocus performance, which we'll dive into in just a moment, as well as giving it another breakdown optically, and also a chance to use it in a more varied settings than what I had the opportunity to do before. It just so happened I was able to take this lens along with me as one of the lenses I took on a recent trip to beautiful Quebec City and in Quebec, Canada. And as a byproduct of that, I got a lot of really amazing images that I look forward to sharing with you in this review. First, however, a word from our sponsor.
Today's episode is brought to you by Phantom Wallet, the minimalist modern wallet that is now even better with the new Phantom X that is crafted from aluminum right here in Canada. It is 22% smaller and 35% lighter, while still making it easy to access your cards and money when you need them, thanks to their unique fanning mechanism. You could even customize your wallet due to its modular design, with accessories like a money clip, cash holder, ID display, and even Chipolo and AirTag tracking integration. Visit store.phantomwallet.com to check out their unique sizes, styles, and finishes that span from aluminum to wood to carbon fiber, and use code DUSTIN15 for 15% off when you're ready to check out.
Now, I'm not going to cover everything that I did in the previous review. If you want some of those kind of full details when it comes to build quality and some of those things, you can check out that, or you can reference my written review, which I'll link to in the description down below. But just a few things that I do want to highlight as a part of looking at this lens. First of all, this is a great focal length. On Sony, which has a 1.5 times crop factor like Fuji, but it's a little bit wider than Fuji's. Fuji's is actually a hair more than 1.5 times. But on Sony, we've got a full frame equivalent of 19.5 millimeters, which is really in a sweet spot for a lot of different purposes. It's just a great lens to use for interiors, a great lens to use for landscape, obviously. It's also a great lens to use in architecture, and I used it in a museum, things like that. And that is further augmented by the fact that it has really low distortion, which means you're not going to lose that wide angle of view when you're cropping down to correct for things. More on that in just a moment. Now, when it comes to the build quality, a few of the things that stand out is that, first of all, this is a beautifully made lens. It really feels more like a premium lens in many ways than an inexpensive lens. Everything is metal and glass here. Everything moves really nicely, up to including the manual focus ring, which actually has a nice level of damping for a mirrorless lens, which, is focused by wire. But this actually does quite a nice job of emulation. The aperture ring works very nicely. It is a declicked aperture ring, but it moves nice and smoothly. You can do aperture racking if you so desire, but it's also marked out, even though there's not detents there, it's marked out at those 1/3 stop detents if you want to have some precise control over your actual aperture. So everything here up into including the lens hood is all metal, very nice. What's missing here is that there is no weather sealing at this point, and that's certainly something that I miss. And then on Sony, where it's more common to have that, there isn't any kind of AF/MF switch or focus hold button. And so as far as features go, it's basically the aperture ring. Outside of that, not a lot of features here, though I will note it does have a USB-C port where you can do firmware updates right into the lens, which is something that is very welcome because it just helps to future-proof your lens and make sure that you're going to get best performance moving ahead in the future. The other thing that is worth noting is that this lens is a little on the large side for APS-C bodies. I actually liked it a little bit better as a size match on Fuji, where I reviewed it on an X-T4, which is a slightly larger body than either the A6400 or the A6600 that I have access to on Sony. And so as a byproduct, I found that both the size, this is a 90mm lens, so it's a little bit on the long side. It also has a weight of 420 grams. Again, a little bit on the heavier side. Not to say it's onerously large or heavy, but there are smaller and lighter lenses, up to including, Sony's own 11mm f1.8 that I reviewed not that long ago. So know that if you're going to get this lens, this is a more premium lens in terms of the physical size and the weight of the lens, and it's just so you're aware of that. I noted in my Fuji review that this is really probably the best implementation of STM that I've seen in a Viltrox lens so far. And they have really gotten good fast at doing autofocus. And frankly, there is little to differentiate this lens from a Sony lens when it came to the actual performance. And Craig will break down more the video side of things and how it performed for video, but I can let the cat out of the bag a little bit by letting you know that he had great performance in a variety of different applications for video. This lens has minimal focus breathing. Focus pulls are nice and smooth and quiet. I found that on Fuji, where it really stood out, and also on Sony as well, where it maybe stands out less because there's more, good video lenses on Sony, but really good performance there. One thing that also really stood out to me is that I felt like I could have good confidence in accuracy, even when shooting at f1.4 and where my subject wasn't close. And so I was with my wife at an art gallery. I took some photos of her. I only used the Viltrox there. And I took photos of her, and what I found is that I could, focus at varying distances to where she got further and further away from the camera. And I kept getting consistently well-focused results that even at shooting at f1.4, where depth of field was changing, but autofocus was nailing it every time. And so really a great STM performance from this particular lens that really stands out. And so a overall really strong report when it comes to autofocus in this lens. And of course, with the USB-C port, there is the potential for it to get even better if there's some kind of quirk that emerges, as it gets more widespread in its distribution. Now, when it comes to the image quality, I said in my review on Fuji that this really is, to me, it's right up there with their 85mm f1.8 STM as being the very best of Viltrox optics at this point. I stand by that as I took a look at it on a new platform. We'll dive in and we'll take a fresh look with some fresh images here on Sony to see how it holds up in terms of image quality.
So first of all, we'll quickly revisit the focal length and crop factor here in detail. So you can see here on the full frame crop, obviously you've got a weird mechanical vignette there that is obstructing definitely a good part of the image circle. But taking a look down here, it gives an idea of how wide we can go. Now, if I crop away all of that, you can see obviously we're losing a bit down here, but you can see this, whatever this is on the top of the building, extends out to this point. Now, if we go to the full APS-C crop, you can see that we have lost just a little bit extra. And so, not probably a full millimeter, but a fraction of a millimeter on the side. But you can see here that even cropped down to APS-C, lots of detail all across the frame. Obviously still a very useful focal length. It's not really going to be a lens that you can use on full frame efficiently, and you can see that even where it's not affected by mechanical vignette, full frame, you're starting to lose a little bit here in the corners because the lens is just not really engineered for that. Now, when it comes to vignette and distortion, we have a really strong performance in one metric and a not so strong performance in the other. When it comes to the actual amount of distortion, it is natively just about non-existent, as you can see, which is really impressive in a wide-angle lens, and you'll see just how impressive that is in just a moment. But you can see vignette is another story, and so if we look at manual correction here, you can see that while I only used a -1 to deal with whatever little bit of distortion was there, vignetting, I pretty much maxed out sliders and, to get them fully corrected here at this point. Though I will note that in a lot of real-world images, I actually didn't have as big of an issue, and I didn't do a lot of correction of vignette in many images, though obviously there's going to be some where you're going to want to do that. Now, to give you some perspective on that distortion, here's the recent Sony 11mm F1.8, and you can see that the Viltrox looks like it's already pre-corrected for distortion compared to the Sony, which has a fairly massive amount of barrel distortion there. And so, obviously, that's a huge native advantage for the Viltrox, even though the Sony will benefit from better corrections. What I found, however, is that though the Viltrox doesn't have, those native in-camera corrections, I didn't really feel like I needed them all that much. And here's an image where I have literally done zero correction at all. I haven't corrected vignette. I haven't corrected for distortion at all. And you can see that, on this shelf, lines are nice and square. And if we take a quick look here at our aperture value, which is now f2.8 for this particular shot. So let's just go back here for a moment and take a look at these corners. And you can see that, again, as I said, in real-world situations, I didn't find vignette to be really all that severe. And you can see that, there's a difference between what I got in my test results and what I seem to see out in real world. So obviously that very low distortion is going to be really beneficial when using the lens for shooting interior spaces, or in this case, kind of environmental portraiture. It's something where, you can get a really nice looking result. But as you're looking at the whole, there's a lot of straight lines here. And so if you had high distortion, it would really just completely blow the shot. And so this is a lens where I've not done, an image where I've done zero correction for vignette or distortion in this shot. Also, continue to be really impressed by how well the chromatic aberrations are controlled on this lens, considering that that's not always been a Viltrox strength. So in this case, I'm going to look beyond the subject to these areas where we have very bright light coming through the window here, and we've got a lot of contrast zones where you would be seeing fringing along these edges, which fortunately, as you can see, are basically not showing up at all. Likewise, if we look for lateral chromatic aberrations along the edge of the frame, there is a very minimal amount of them there, but nothing that is severe here at all. And you can see that without doing any kind of correction, we're getting a nice looking result here without having to worry about chromatic aberrations basically at all. So how about resolution and contrast? So for this test, I'm using the Sony a6400, so 24 megapixel, currently the highest resolution available on an APS-C body. In the center of the frame, the lens is super sharp, as you can see. Mid-frame, there is a little bit of drop-off, though still quite sharp. And as we pan across here, we can see results look good. And right off into the corners, we have actually quite a strong result. So even from wide open f1.4, a consistently very good result. If we move on to f1.8, you can see that there's a little bit of brightening in the corners and a little increase in contrast and resolution, but everything really looks pretty fantastic here, even at f1.8. Now, just for the fun of it, let's compare the Viltrox 13mm at f1.8 to the Sony at f1.8 and see how they hold up in terms of resolution. So in the center of the frame, the lenses look really more similar than different. I think that the Sony's color is a little bit purer, but you can see that as far as resolution and contrast go, they're quite similar. And as we look in the mid-frame, I give a little bit of an edge to the Sony in terms of contrast, though again, but if you didn't see them, other than side by side, you probably wouldn't notice. As far as the corners go, the Sony has a little bit better contrast, as you can see. Resolution goes, they're fairly similar, but the Sony is the winner in terms of contrast. But the bottom line is that these two lenses are really not all that different optically. The corners on the Viltrox get increasingly better here by f2, looking quite good. At f2.8, not a lot of difference, though you can see now it's very, very sharp all across the frame. By f2.8, you're getting very close to getting peak performance, and that center is now just, brilliantly sharp. Going from f2.8 to f4, f1.4. It's a law of diminishing returns. You're already excellent, and so you can just get very minutely better. But we can see that, right off into the corners now, just everywhere across the frame. It is a very, very sharp lens. If we move on to f5.6, we're going to see just kind of a continuation of the same, and that there is a very minute improvement of contrast in the corner, but already we're at really, really excellent levels. Our minimum aperture here is f16, but you can see that diffraction is starting to rob away contrast, and so it's not really as good as even f1.4 by f16. So as per usual, I recommend around f11 as a practical limit, unless you absolutely have to go beyond that for depth of field purposes. So we've been looking at a 200% magnification. If we go to a more typical 100% magnification, you can see in this very deep scene at f8 that we've got detail everywhere that we look, and so we can look towards the horizon. Everything is very sharp and delineated, and of course that low distortion really helps all the straight lines in this shot, to where we've got just incredible detail everywhere that we look. So this is a very, very sharp lens. Now, our minimum focus distance is 22 centimeters, which obviously is not too bad, but while the actual amount of resolution and contrast looks good, and for a wide-angle lens, this is a pretty flat plane of focus, but what we also see is that the total magnification level is not super high, just barely over 0.10 times, and so you're not going to be able to get super close to subjects and get large magnification to blow out backgrounds. Now, while this isn't minimum focus distance here, just taking a look at the quality of the bokeh briefly, less of a concern maybe in a wide-angle lens, but a shot like this illustrates that you can, create some dimensionality and blur out a background. Another shot here where, the background isn't completely obliterated, but we can see we've got, nice detail on our subject and a slightly blurred out background. Now, I have long noted that I don't consider Viltrox color to be off the charts. Maybe their optical glass is not as exceptional as some other manufacturers, but at the same time, if you're in a setting where you have the potential for nice color, you're going to get very, very nice looking images off of this lens, which I certainly did. A lot of images I was really happy with, and in this case, the colors are deeply saturated, but they're still natural looking, and just a lot of images that I'm really, really happy with in terms of the end product. And so I would not hesitate to use this lens in a wide variety of situations. I had fun with this as a walk around focal length, and so you can see here using depth of field at f1.4, nice detail on the chart here in the cafe, but blurring out the background and the foreground, interesting for that. And of course, it's really nice walk around for getting landscape type scenes and all of those different applications. And as already noted, it even will work for kind of environmental portraiture, as we've got here of myself. We've already talked about autofocus, but just to revisit here, even though my subject is a long way away, as you can see, you can also see that even at f1.4, it's focused perfectly on her, even though I wasn't able to get, she's so small in the frame that I wasn't able to get eye detect as far as showing up in the viewfinder, but you can see that autofocus has really done the job and delivered a beautiful result. And so, again, another application for maybe a relatively inexpensive wide angle to complement your other portrait photography if you want to do some more environmental type shots like this. Now, I did note that flare resistance is not always top notch during my review of this on Fuji. What I can say is that while I didn't kind of torture test it like I did on Fuji, I used it a lot in a variety of lighting conditions, and frankly, as you can see in this shot where the sun is right there in the frame and where I was shooting the statue, there's very little to criticize here as far as this particular shot and others. I looked for evidence of a flare in my real-world shots. And really this little bit of ghosting right here is as much as I got. So bottom line is that this is a lens that really doesn't do a terrible job in flare conditions.
So as you can see, overall, this lens really does deliver, and I came away with a lot of images that I'm just really delighted with. I really like the lens. I have very little to criticize about it, and I particularly like that it natively has such low distortion. That just makes it very useful, particularly in a brand like Viltrox that frankly doesn't get the kind of first-party support for correcting in camera that, you know, obviously a Sony lens would, but even to a lesser extent a Sigma or a Tamron lens. And so the fact that it has such, you know, so little things to correct is a real benefit when it comes to getting great looking images. And it also makes it a really tempting option for vlogging, or if you're doing, for example, real estate photography, shooting interiors. I think that's a great application for this. I also really like this as a walk around focal length. In the city, it was fun. You know, there were some applications where it's a little bit too wide, but I found in many situations I actually like the focal length, and I was able to get a lot of images that I was really happy with. Now, when it came to the Fuji side of things, I really thought that this lens stood out as a great option because there were basically no alternatives at a comparative price point on the Fuji platform, where it's mostly been only first-party lenses, and when you talk about their f1.4 lenses, the price tends to be more like double what this lens goes for. Sony's a little bit different in that Sony has been a much more open platform. There's a lot more development, and even from Sony, there are lenses that are closer to this lens that are not radically more in price. Maybe the standout would be the recent Sony 11mm F1.8, which is considerably lighter and smaller, more compact, has a few more features, including weather sealing, and has a price point of only $110 more. Now, there are things that the Viltrox does better. This has much lower native distortion and vignette, and so there certainly are advantages. And of course, f1.4 is not f1.8, and so you do get that larger maximum aperture. But I mean, I think that it's going to give people more to consider when there are lenses that aren't, you know, radically more expensive. You know, another alternative being the Sigma 16mm f1.4. I think in many ways this lens actually compares fairly nicely to the Sigma. But again, you know, your mileage may vary. You're going to have to make a buying decision on that. At the very least, I can say this. This is a lens that, even though there are a lot of alternatives, I can still consider it to still be an attractive option if you're interested in this focal length and, of course, the very large maximum aperture, and a lens that is beautifully built, has great autofocus, and delivers great image quality results. That's certainly a lens worth considering. I'm Dustin Abbott, and if you look in the description down below, you can find linkage to that full text review that I referenced, also to an image gallery if you want to look at some of these photos. There are buying links there if you'd like to purchase one from a variety of different retailers in different markets. Also linkage to follow myself or Craig on social media, and once Craig's review goes live, I will also link to it in the description down below if you want to look at things from a more video-oriented perspective. But there's also a linkage to purchase channel merchandise to become a patron. And of course, if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button right here on YouTube. Thanks for watching, have a great day, and let the light in.